On the Farm Bureau guest line, check out favorites.com and go with the home team. Matt Cohen, he covers the Auburn Tigers for AL.com. Matt, before we get into talking about Mississippi State Auburn this Saturday, you wrote a very interesting column yesterday. The honeymoon is over. I got to ask a very simple question, Matt. Really?
I think
really?
So I think that got misconstrued a little bit by a lot of people. Like, I'm not saying fire anyone. That was not the point of that. I think the idea there was this moment where, like, basically anyone having the idea of, like, Hugh Freezes, like, everything he does is, like, unquestioned, and like that moment of, like, you know, endless and boundless optimism, I thought ended against Ole Miss. And my reasoning for that was it was the first time I've heard anyone, you know, boo this football team as it ran off the field. And that quite vocal, you know, frustration from the fans in Jordan-Hare Stadium, we hadn't heard it yet. And that was come from a program that had so much hope coming into the season. And I think that the hope from fans, at least from my impression, is, like, very knowledgeable of the fact that this wasn't going to be a successful year one. And that's okay. It was never going to be an Auburn team that's going to win in year one. But I think more so it's in the way they've looked. Like, that they have been horrible on offense, especially with passing specifically. I believe Auburn's one of the 9 worst passing offenses in the entire country based on yards per game. And I don't blame fans for getting frustrated about that. And I think that was the first time that we really saw some criticism, serious criticism of this year's specific team, going away from the typical, what we've heard from fans in the past about of like, oh, like, it's all going to be fine, everything's going to be great. It was, you know, I don't think anyone was calling for anyone's head, although I do think you're starting to get to the point where it's like, okay, there's going to be an offensive coordinator change this offseason, most likely, unless something changes pretty significantly in the next couple weeks. But I think it was just the moment that we first saw frustration and not just boundless hope is kind of the way I was looking at that.
And the offensive coordinator thing is interesting because, you know, with some of Freezes' predecessors, specifically Gus Malzahn, it was always this never-ending battle between, all right, he's going to call the plays, no, he's going to bring somebody in to call the plays, and then midway through the season, he's going to take play calling back. Is there a reason that Hugh Freeze just doesn't take over the play calling here? He's a really good play caller. He's shown that before.
Yeah, it's an interesting conversation, and I think he's kind of going back and forth with it himself. It's difficult for him. He said that, like, he is not sure how to handle not calling plays. First time he's ever been in that position. I think the reason why the conversation, and, you know, I have not heard anything rumored about any coaching changes. Like, anything I say on that's purely my own opinion at that point. But I think the issue here is that you brought in this guy, Philip Montgomery, with the sole purpose of calling plays so that Hugh Freeze could focus on things like recruiting, could focus on just the other tasks that surround being a head coach. And, you know, that are so necessary at this point off the field because there's a lot of building to do with this Auburn team, given where it was left after Brian Harson's tenure as the head coach. So I think the fact that then you've heard Hugh Freeze a little bit since then take a tad more of autonomy in the play calling. Going into the Georgia game a few weeks ago, back in September, you were hearing that Hugh Freeze was more involved in offensive meetings. He had a play card a lot more during the game. I think he was improving everything a bit more during the game, and he seemed more involved. I think that's kind of waned a tad the past couple of weeks, but he's still more involved in the offense than he wanted to be, and he has said that has come at the expense of he's not been able to put as much time into recruiting as he was hoping he would. He's still doing, I think, a pretty good job in recruiting overall, but I think that's the main reason why you're not seeing Freeze totally take over there, because his top priority right now is building for next year's team and the years after's team, which I think is the more important priority at this point anyway. So I think that's correct on his part, and that's why you're probably not seeing him take a larger role this season.
Last week with Mississippi State playing Arkansas, we talked at great length about mentality and how both of those teams were kind of fragile coming into that game. Obviously, State got some confidence with the win. Now it's Auburn. I want to ask that question about, mentally, where do you think this Auburn team is?
I think everyone on this team, at least outwardly, expresses a lot of confidence that they can turn this around. I mean, Auburn is coming off of a 4-game losing streak, but it also is the toughest 4-game stretch they have this entire season. I think reasonably you expected Auburn to be 3-4 at this point. This was just not a roster that was going to be ready to win games with that stretch of Georgia. Texas A&M, Georgia, LSU, and Ole Miss all consecutively. That's really tough. And I don't think Auburn was a pretty heavy underdog in every single one of those games. I think that Hugh Freeze has not been shy in letting the team know they're underdogs. I don't think they are both, I'm sure they believe they're going to go in winning the game, but they're also aware of the fact that they are the underdog in those games. This is the first time against Mississippi State that Auburn's been favored in 5 weeks, including the bye week. So this is a position that Auburn has not been in a minute. And I think the players are confident that they can turn this around. Obviously, they want to get to a bowl game at this point. And for Auburn to get to a bowl game, this is pretty much a must-win for Auburn, considering that there's still the Alabama game eventually on the schedule. So I think the confidence is pretty high. We heard yesterday kind of a funny quote from Auburn safety Jalen Simpson, who described this team as needing to have a plankton mentality, like the SpongeBob character, with the idea that plankton's always going after the Krabby Patty formula every episode. So Auburn's just got to keep going with that same, that same motivation to keep going after something, even though plankton, he never gets the formula, except for I guess the first half of the SpongeBob movie, but I'm probably getting too into cartoons here. But the idea being that they need to just keep having drive and keep pushing, which is it's a really funny way to look at kind of what the mindset is. But it's actually a pretty good point on Simpson's part.
I'm trying to think of a better analogy for that. None is coming to mind, so didn't think we were going to talk about SpongeBob today, but I'll go with it.
I legitimately don't think he meant it at first when he came up with it as this very on-the-nose mentality. But as he was talking through it yesterday, I think he kind of realized, wait a minute, this actually is exactly what we need to be doing.
They need to brand this somehow. There needs to be some Auburn T-shirts with some SpongeBob stuff.
I think some fans have been working on that, and I guess he did actually, by that same virtue, he did call Will Rogers to be Mr. Krabs in the sake of this week. So really, I don't know how much further you want to go down the SpongeBob train, but I could keep going if you need me to.
I don't. I'm a little too old for SpongeBob. I missed that window. But it brings up an interesting question about Will Rogers. I don't expect Will Rogers to play in this game for Mississippi State. Is Auburn preparing for Will Rogers like they think he's going to play, or are they looking at Mike Wright and thinking that's who's going to be out there for Mississippi State?
It sounds like Auburn's preparing for both, most likely. I think earlier in the week when we talked to Hugh Freeze, and it seemed a little bit still kind of up in the air about will Rogers play. I think he seems to be kind of keeping that in mind. We have not heard from him just from what Hugh Freeze talked about with the sense of Mike Wright. So I think that preparing for both would be my sense of it. I obviously am not an expert in Mike Wright film, but I would get the impression that Mississippi State's offense obviously struggled last week in Arkansas. So Auburn's defense is basically, I think, the same as they have every week. They've had a really good plan. They're just going to need help from their offense. This is really what it's going to come down to more than anything.
It feels like there's no rhyme or reason to the substitutions at quarterback for Auburn. When Thorne comes in, when Ashford comes in, it doesn't feel like it's a package for Robbie Ashford or a package for Peyton Thorne. It's just kind of, I don't know how to put it, sort of randomness to it. Does Freeze have a plan for the way he's using those two guys, or am I right? And it's just you see whoever comes in comes in.
So it's a bit of both. Obviously, they both do have a package of plays. What I don't know, and what has not really been described to us, is exactly when they choose to use which package. Is there? I don't think it's totally clear going into the game. I don't think they have these going into the game a plan of we're going to use the Thorne package in X and X part of the game, and the Ashford package in X part of the game. We saw last week Ashford came out and started the first drive for Auburn against Ole Miss. I mean, I wouldn't go so far and say he took over as the starting quarterback. That's not really what happened. Just Auburn chose to use that package first.
Right.
Peyton Thorne is still Auburn's starter. So I think it's both true that they have a package for each of them. And Hugh Freezes described it as two very different offenses with them. And I think that's a little bit true. I think there's some similarities. It's not totally different, but the key difference is that, clearly Peyton Thorne is the one they feel more comfortable throwing the football, whereas Robbie Ashford they've run a lot more heavier personnel with 13 personnel with 3 tight ends on the field, and definitely, not quite telegraphing they're going to run the ball, but like pretty much telegraphing they're going to run the ball. Ashford's definitely the more dynamic athlete of the two of them. So when they have him on the field, while he is definitely an improved passer than what he may have been last year, his best help to Auburn is the ball in his hands, not getting it out of his hands. So I think that on the one hand, there is that.
Matt, we're on a hard break. Man, we're going to have to let you go. Matt Cohen, AL.com. Thanks, man.